Dragonstruck, Part 2. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated using AI.
Chapter 13. Harte. Of all the women in the world, the airlines had assigned the seat next to mine to a scientist. Not just any scientist. A beautiful one. Who made my dragon behave like an overgrown child clinging to the most prized toy in the box. As per usual. I'd spoken without thinking. I'd mentioned the word mate to Eilís. And her freaking researcher's mind had latched onto the term. Husband. Boyfriend. Whatever you want to call it. Siobhan's young. She has a crush. It'll pass when she meets the one. She tapped her index finger against her lips.
Yes, but I find your word choice interesting. Different species of animals have different practices. Depending on the breed, vulpine either mate for life, practice polygyny or pick new mates each breeding season. Of course, I'm not factoring in her human side.
Her words might have trailed off. But I could all but see the thoughts tumbling around in her head. I braced myself for questions.
Exactly how does it work? Are you more animal than human or vice versa?
She laughed before I could answer.
Silly question. I know you're more human than dragon because you spoke to me in words telepathically. Your body changes, but your mind is intact.
It varies. Each type of shifter and individual is different. But to answer your question, my dragon and I are one and the same. I spoke the truth. Or at least it had been the truth up until the moment she'd walked onto the plane.
Why do I get the feeling you're holding something back?
She grinned and slid her arms around my waist. My dragon purred. She'd reached for me. Not because she was frightened or in danger, but because she wanted to. I drew her closer and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Because there's more to it. There have been times when my more primal nature wants something that doesn't work for my more rational side.
I can say the same though. I want to eat a dozen donuts or stay in bed all day. But I know my actions have consequences.
Eilís nuzzled into my neck.
What about dragons? Do they mate for life?
Some do. Some are polyamorous and share a mate with another dragon. And others live solitary lives. I needed to get her off the topic before I dug myself deeper into a conversation I had no intention of having. I captured her chin between my thumb and forefinger and tilted her face toward mine. Her eyes fluttered closed. And I took it as an invitation to kiss her. Eilís had the sort of lips that were full of contradictions. Sinful and sweet. Urgent and reserved. Demanding and delicate. I had the feeling I could taste them hundreds of times and never grow bored. Between my dragon and my poet soul, she would be the end of me. I pulled away. Eilís. In the movies, females placed a single finger on a man's lips to quiet him. But Eilís was no heroine dreamed up by some screenwriter. He covered my mouth with her entire hand and met my eyes with a determination that shocked the living shit out of me.
Harte, I'm not stupid. I know how this will work out. You're going back on tour, but I'll never leave this island. As I said before, I understand the consequences.
I struggled to make sense of her conflicting words and actions. Right. But you shot me down upstairs. She lowered her gaze.
It occurred to me that this time with you might be my last chance at happiness. I should take it.
Her trembling voice snapped my willpower like a broken guitar string. My dragon rammed against the barriers keeping him inside. He wanted to lay at her feet and do whatever it took to make her smile. For once, I agreed. I pulled her to my chest, slid my hands to her thighs, and lifted her from the ground. Eilís made a yelping sound that made me hard. She laced her fingers behind my neck and wrapped her legs around my waist. Before I could say a word, she crushed my lips with hers. This time, there was no contradiction in the kiss, only desire. I thanked the gods and goddesses for my supernatural strength. A mere human could never have navigated the stairs without dropping the rather distracting woman. Her tongue tangling with mine sent a burst of lust through me. I hadn't given much thought to what she wore beneath the bathrobe until my fingers dug into her bare arse. I missed a step, but Eilís didn't seem to notice. She'd taken full advantage of our aligned bodies to grind against me. Roaring for me to claim her, my dragon battered against his barrier. I took a step inside and sank to my knees. Eilís broke the kiss long enough to yank my t-shirt over my head. I needed to slow things down, to look at her, to savor the moment, but my brain had disconnected from my body. Easing her to the floor, I lowered my mouth to her chest and lost myself in the feel of her flesh. The dragon urged me to bite her. To break her skin and mark her as mine. But I couldn't. I wouldn't do that to either of us. I shifted my weight and settled between her thighs. Her scent called to not only the dragon, but something deep within my soul. I'd never been so turned on. So needy that I had to fight myself not to turn her over. And slam into her like an animal. Eilís was human. A fragile thing compared to me. I wouldn't risk hurting her. The first taste of her sent me spiraling into a crescendo of sensations and emotions. I had to get control of myself or it'd be over far too quickly.
Stop.
She curled her fingers in my hair and jerked my head back.
Harte, wait. Something's wrong.
I glanced up the long line of her body and met her wide eyes. Wrong. Her shoulders shook with each labored breath. But I struggled to keep from staring at her breasts.
I can't explain. My body aches. Not like sex aches. It hurts. And my thoughts.
She pushed herself to her elbows. My mouth went dry. I wanted to pull her close. But I didn't dare touch her. I'd shared Aisling's, my former mates, emotions and thoughts, but only when she was in danger. The idea I could share an even deeper bond with another woman made my throat tighten. Tell me what you were thinking.
Blood. I was thinking about biting you or digging my nails into your back.
Her voice lowered as if she were ashamed. The physical distance, as well as the sobering conversation, had quelled the beast enough for me to break through my lust-induced fog. I drew a breath to steady myself. You're reacting to my dragon, sharing his thoughts and emotions. And mine. But I wasn't ready to share that with anyone. Not yet.
You want to tear me to ribbons and eat me.
Eilís sat upright and pulled the robe closed. No. Nothing so violent. Shifters have a habit of leaving love marks on each other. Scratches. Little nibbles. Hickeys. She wrapped her arms around her knees.
I don't understand. I've read the tabloids. I know you have sex with lots of women. How has no one told a reporter about this?
It hasn't happened with anyone else. At least not in a very, very long time. I reached for her. But she recoiled. I pressed my back against the wall and settled in for a long conversation. Eilís, love, I believe you're meant to be my mate.
Chapter 14.
Eilís.
Mate. There was that word again. Only this time Harte had used it in reference to me. I sat in stunned silence. But the man, who I assumed had just done the shifter equivalent of professing his love, looked miserable. Sitting with his back against the wall, he closed his eyes and drew a long, slow breath.
You asked before if dragons mated for life.
I had, and now that I thought about it, he dodged the question with a kiss.
We do.
He turned his gaze toward the window.
Long ago, I had a mate. Her name was Aisling. She was killed by hunters.
The pain in his voice broke my heart, but I pressed on. Long ago.
I met Aisling when I was Chevon's age. We were together for 2 decades before she was taken from me.
He glanced at me.
I'm over 300 years old.
Somehow, I'd accepted the fox shifter's age without much of a problem. But my brain rebelled against the idea of this man walking the earth for over 3 centuries.
Dragons can live thousands of years.
His voice lowered.
Some never find a mate. But it seems the fates have given me 2.
I wanted to blame his melancholy on memories of the woman he'd lost. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his mood had more to do with me. Pushing to my feet, I offered him my hand. Relax, I don't believe in fate or luck, or mates. I believe in science. Falling in love is a chemical reaction in the brain. Likely a holdover from prehistoric times when the survival of the species depended upon finding the strongest, healthiest partner, and having babies. He smirked and shook his head.
After everything you've seen on Eilís Blair, how can you put your faith in science?
Given a suitable sample size, the correct variables, and conditions, anything can be proven or negated. I stuff my hands in my pockets. Shifters, dragons, even magic, have a scientific explanation. Harte flashed me his album cover grin.
Explain magic to me in scientific terms.
Okay, shifters, for example, are probably an undiscovered species, a mutation of multiple species, or a step in the evolutionary process. I'm sure there are laws of nature that apply to all of you like there are with humans. I mean, it's not like a druid pulled you out of a hat. You were born or hatched or created somehow.
Born.
He looked as if he held back laughter.
And magic. How is it that Eilís Blair exists, but is unseen and impenetrable by humans?
It's not impenetrable. I'm human, and I crossed it. I'm not so sure others can't do the same, but they don't see the island. Lucky for me, I'd already contemplated the question. I plopped down on his gigantic bed. Whoever created the barrier around the island must have discovered a new law of physics. that allows them to manipulate matter, or light, or the currents, perhaps all three. I'd have to study it, speak to the person who made it, and recreate it to say for certain. He rubbed the stubble on his jaw.
I'll agree that magic follows certain rules. And if they were known to humans, someone in a lab coat could form hypotheses and prove it exists.
Hypothesis. They'd form a hypothesis. I giggled and waved my hand. Forget it. His cheeks flushed.
I'm a poet and a musician, not a scientist.
I'm happy to learn you aren't good at everything. I smiled, though I felt every inch of the distance between us. Prehistoric drive to procreate. Or not. I craved his touch. Let me see if I understand. I experienced your thoughts and physical responses. Because we are mates.
Potential mates. We haven't bonded yet.
All right, now we're getting somewhere. There have been many studies of identical twins who report the same type of phenomenon. Perhaps my reactions to you.
Our reactions to each other.
He stood and walked to the bed. The idea of him feeling me, the same way I felt him, thrilled and terrified me. You share my thoughts. Harte brushed his fingertips across my cheek.
Not yet. But I might if we were fully mated.
I leaned into his touch. What exactly does that mean?
The bonding itself involves marking each other during the act of lovemaking. There's a ceremony to announce to the community we're mated. But it's more of an excuse to have a party. Other shifters consent a bonded pair with or without the ritual.
I wrinkled my nose. Overdeveloped olfactory glands.
That in magic.
He ran his hand through the length of my hair. Okay, so we have sex, scar each other, and there's an optional ceremony. Is that it? He sat beside me.
Mates find it difficult to be apart. They can sense the other's location and emotions. Some can communicate telepathically. The bond varies. But it's always intense.
As if my body wanted to prove his point. His grief hung over me like a heavy cumulonimbus cloud. I didn't understand why, but I had a sudden need to ask about Aisling. How did you survive when she died? He stiffened his spine and jerked away. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. I couldn't have read it, or heard it, or learned about it in class. But I knew the loss of a mate meant the other would most likely perish.
Bonded pairs usually follow each other to the grave. The druids say I lived because we were young and newly mated.
He stood and paced as if he could walk off the memories. Seconds dragged into minutes before he stopped and turned to me.
I don't have room in my life for a woman.
He's afraid to love again. The thought came to me as if someone else had whispered it into my ear. My heart ached for him, but his rejection hurt more. I refused to turn into one of those pathetic women who made excuses for men. Instead, I grabbed hold of my pain and anger. First of all, I have no intention of being your mate or anything else. If you remember, I offered no strings attached sex, not a proposal. Second, I'm well aware of your great big life. I have one too. A family and friends and a career I will never get back to. Because I chose to throw a life preserver to what I thought was a drowning man. Third, you can kiss my ass. Harte's mouth moved, but no sound came out. I stood and yanked the robe tighter. I want to speak to Esmeralda. Call her or use magic or send a carrier pigeon shifter. Do whatever you have to. But I'm leaving this house in the morning.
Eilís.
With my head held high, I walked into my room, closed the door, and turned the lock. I had a sense of Harte's frustration, but beneath it, his sadness threatened to consume me. No, Eilís, pull yourself together and think logically. He's upset because he's thinking about his dead mate. This has nothing to do with you. For the first time in my life, rationalizing my emotions had left me hollow.
Chapter 15. Harte. The towering trees in the birch grove had a way of humbling me. As large as my life, career, or ego grew, I would never stand as long or as tall as the sacred trees. They had seen and felt more than I would in 3 dragon lifetimes. I pressed my hand against the papery bark and closed my eyes. Ancient magic hummed through my body and seeped into my soul. The sacred song of my people. Our history. Our fate grew louder until my heart beat in rhythm with the bass tones. This is what brought me back to Eilís Blair every December. Peace and oneness with those who came before and those still to come.
Warden. You've returned.
Esmeralda's voice blended with the music from the trees. I knelt before her. What is today lucky for? Druidess. People. Magical and mundane. Had asked druids the same question since the beginning of time. It was a sign of respect. But more so. A signal that one had come seeking assistance or advice. Esmeralda and her kind had the ability to see the future. Among other things. In ancient times. Druids chose which days to battle, which to rest, and which to celebrate.
Rise. My sister's mate. Heart of Clan Birch.
She laughed.
You tell me what luck comes today. For I believe you already know.
I met her gaze, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I saw only Esmeralda. As Aisling's twin, they were identical on the outside, but inside, the two were very different. My mate had a wild streak that years of training hadn't tamed. I'd often wondered what changes Aisling would have brought to Eilís Blair and the Druids, had she survived.
My intuition tells me you know the answer. But the look upon your face tells me you are not yet ready to speak them aloud.
She turned and motioned for me to follow. Your intuition is correct. I shoved my hands in my pockets and walked with her to a stream.
It is rare to find two mates in one lifetime.
Esmeralda stared into the rushing water.
Many are destined to be alone.
I nodded, because what could I say? Between her magic and her position among our people, her chances of finding a mate were about as good as being struck by lightning 33 seconds after winning the lottery.
Do you love her?
She glanced at me from the corner of her eye. My dragon recognized Eilís as his after one sniff. I hesitated to explain further. Admitting I had feelings for another woman felt like a betrayal to her sister.
You and the beast are one soul. Heart.
She turned and folded her arms.
I miss Aisling. Too. But most spirits return in a few years. A decade at the longest. It's likely she's come and gone from this world many times without crossing either of our paths.
I'd long since given up hope that my mate would be reincarnated. If I were honest, I questioned the Druids' belief in soul rebirth. However, I hadn't considered Aisling could be reborn without my knowledge. Is that possible? For her to have walked the earth without me feeling her pull?
You would have felt something.
She held my gaze as if waiting for me to put the pieces together. Why are you being so cryptic? Tell me what it is you want me to know.
I can't tell you what you're not willing to hear.
Well, that's just great.
Have you spent so much time in the human world? You've forgotten our teachings.
Esmeralda gave me a patient smile, but I could see the pain behind her kaleidoscope eyes. I shrugged because I knew better than to share my doubts. I had to tread lightly, or I'd end up ordered to permanently return to Eilís Blair earlier than I'd anticipated. What would happen if she returned? I know the process. Aisling's soul would be born into another body. But how would it work if I take another mate, and she returns?
That is not a question I can answer. Open your heart and the truth will reveal itself to you.
The druidess wiped a tear from her cheek, faced me, and smiled.
Tell me. Harte. Warden of Clan Birch. What is today lucky for?
Letting go, my voice cracked.
Of the past. Or of the future.
Her words burned like feedback through headphones. Why don't you tell me? Because I sure as hell don't know. I knew my place. I knew my duty. I knew she deserved my respect. But I'd come here for answers. And received nothing but questions. The situation with Eilís had me searching parts of myself I'd stopped analyzing after Aisling died. Just like I had no one complaining when I left my dirty clothes on the floor. I no longer had someone inspiring me to become a better man. And I liked it that way. Esmeralda placed her hand on my shoulder.
Send the woman to me.
I sighed, partly because she hadn't reprimanded me, and partly because Eilís had asked to see the druidess. Maybe Esmeralda needed to spend time with the human before she could tell me what to do. At least that was the lie I told myself. I will. When should I return for guidance? She tossed her long red curls over her shoulder and laughed.
I suspect you will have your answers soon enough.
Esmeralda hadn't handed out punishment for my rudeness. But she sure as hell would take the opportunity to teach me a lesson. Her laughter echoed through the grove long after she'd vanished into the trees. 3 hours later, I'd replayed every word, gesture, and undertone of the conversation with the druidess, and still came up empty. Surely, she'd said or hinted at a resolution. Esmeralda was Aisling's sister. For lug's sake, how could she be so nonchalant about my taking another mate? I had no bloody idea how long I'd wandered, but when I stopped sulking, I found myself outside the pub in Deer and Bryn. The druidess might have scrambled my brains, but my body knew how to take the edge off. I slid onto a stool and ordered a pint. The leprechaun bartender, with an attitude large enough to make up for what he lacked in height, eyed me.
You're the birch lizard with the human female.
What's it to you? I allowed the dragon to peer out my eyes. It was petty. But the wee asshole had picked the wrong day to piss me off. American pop culture had leprechauns all wrong. They weren't happy little guys with blue horseshoes, green clovers, and blue diamonds, but they were magically delicious. In fact, picturing this one seasoned with Cajun spices made my mouth water.
I won't be serving any human lovers in this establishment.
He puffed out his chest. I could have pulled rank. Reminded him I was one of the wardens here to protect the island from people capable of taking out dragons. But I doubted it would matter. I'd have better luck getting a straight answer from a druid than I would arguing with a racist. I won't forget your hospitality.
And folks around here won't forget you brought filth into our sanctuary. She must be one hell of a lay to bring disgrace to a warden.
I had the leprechaun across the bar, and dangling by his shirt. Before I'd realized I'd lunged for him. The little gnat kicked and scratched but couldn't break free. I shook him. Hard enough to get his attention. You racist piece of garbage. You're not fit to clean her toilet.
Hart. Put Owen down.
Ian chuckled from the doorway.
He's as agreeable as a hemorrhoid. But he pours a good drink.
I dropped the guy. Yeah, I wouldn't know. Lucky Charms over there won't serve a human lover.
Then he won't be having my business either.
Ian spat on the floor.
This is my pub. I have a right to refuse service to anyone I please.
Owen straightened his clothing. Keep this up, and you won't have any patrons to turn away. I turned for the door. The leprechaun's expression darkened.
Stinking dragons. Your brains are too small to understand we're superior. They are one step away from monkeys. And there are plenty of folks around here who agree with me.
I spun on my heel to crack his skull and show him the size of his grey matter, but Ian grabbed my arm and pulled me to the door.
He's not worth it. Come on.
He slung his arm over my shoulder. We'd walked 2 blocks before either of us spoke, but people stared. I suppose it wasn't every day they saw 2 pissed-off dragons storming down the street. Ian lowered his voice, likely to avoid drawing more attention.
It's easy to forget our kind are just as narrow-minded as those in the human world.
I pointed back toward the pub. Bullshit like that is going to get Eilís hurt. Or worse.
They'll simmer down once the druids make it known they've accepted her.
I rounded on him. Really? You honestly believe people like that piece of shit, Owen, are going to welcome her with open arms? Because the druids decide to allow her to live here? He glanced around, turned to me, and squared his shoulders.
No, but I can think of one way to make things easier on her.
Yeah?
Claim her. For the love of law. Make her your mate and no one would be stupid enough to hurt her.
First Esmeralda, and now Ian. I ran my hand over my jaw. And why would I do that?
You tell me. What's the story? And don't say nothing. You practically pissed on her to mark your territory. When I flirted with her.
I debated what to tell him. I trusted Ian with my life. But we'd rarely spoken about women. Met her on a plane. He laughed loud enough several people looked in our direction.
No freaking way. She's clueless at 50,000 feet.
Making a mental note to delete the tweets. I walked toward the village square. One and the same. She ended up on the same ferry. The rest is history.
Right. History.
He followed me. There was no sense in denying it. Ian had already put 2 and 2 together. My dragon likes the way she smells. A lot.
And
I don't want to tie myself down to a woman. Think about the band. The music. Ian stopped walking.
Screw the band. We have maybe 5 years before someone notices we haven't aged.
Then if we stop touring. I pulled my shirt over my head. I need to shift. Esmeralda ordered me to bring Eilís to her. Ian stepped closer and lowered his voice.
Did it ever occur to you that you can claim her and return her to her life?
You've never been mated. You don't know how hard it is to be away from each other. That would eat me alive. I stepped out of my jeans and bundled my clothes into a tight ball.
You selfish son of a birch. You don't think it'll hurt her when you leave? She's lost everything, and if she's half as gone for you as you are for her, you're going to break her heart.
It won't come to that. This conversation is over. I turned my back to him and called my dragon into existence.
The hell it won't.
The inn had stood too close to me when I shifted and ended up pinned beneath my tail.
Get off me and pull your head out of your ass.
My head is where it needs to be. I sat back on my haunches.
Oh yeah. I have a pretty good view of your hole right now. And I definitely see your face.
Chapter 16.
Eilís.
Spices and the familiar scent of apples warmed me before I'd taken a sip of my cider. I'd spent the better part of 2 weeks with Esmeralda in the orchard. She'd instructed me on the ancient names and healing properties of various trees, plants, and flowers. For my part, I relayed their modern uses in the names of the pharmaceuticals derived from their chemical compounds. What is that? It looks like Viscum album, but I've never seen mistletoe with purple berries. My heart pounding, I set my mug on the ground and inspected the strange plant. Relaxing in a patch of grass, Esmeralda plucked leaves from her dress and hair.
You are correct. It is mistletoe from Tasmania.
But it hasn't grown there since prehistoric times. The only known fossilized evidence of tricolpites thamasi places it extinct over 30 million years ago. I carefully clipped a piece of the mysterious plant and placed it in waxed paper. Esmeralda shrugged.
Come. There are things other than plants we should speak of.
I felt my cheeks flush. I'd done it. I'd out-nerded a druid. The very people who loved plants as much as I did.
Don't be embarrassed. Your love of nature and healing is commendable. But life is meaningless without balance.
I sat and sipped my quickly cooling cider.
It's time for you to return to Harte. He will be here soon to collect you.
She spoke as if discussing the weather, when in reality, the idea of spending time with a man who'd flat-out rejected me made my stomach hurt. Will I be allowed to continue my work with you? I hated how desperate I sounded, but in the short time I'd spent with Esmeralda, I'd grown to love her.
He's leaving in 10 days.
She rested her hand on mine.
I'd like for you to stay with him until he returns to the human world.
I wanted to protest, but something in her expression changed my mind. The druidess's eyes had lost their mirth. Even more troubling, she seemed to avoid my gaze. You're worried about him?
Yes.
Esmeralda drew her knees to her chest.
Harte's like a brother to me. He was my twin sister's mate.
A memory tickled the back of my mind. Aisling was a druidess, but she wanted to be a warden. She tilted her head and studied me.
How did you know that?
I tapped my fingers to my lips and struggled to remember what he'd said about her. Harte told me how she died. I guess I assumed she was a warden, too. But when you said twin sister, I thought maybe she was more like you. The words coming out of my mouth made no sense. I hadn't guessed or assumed. Somehow I'd known Aisling had lost her life because she'd left the sacred groves to hunt with her mate. Esmeralda watched me like a professor waiting for the correct answer. My lips tingled, a tingle that intensified into burning. Without thinking, I licked them, and my tongue erupted in pain.
You touched your mouth after cutting the plant.
The druidess continued to study me. But it's only poisonous if ingested. I sounded as if I'd been hit with a massive dose of lidocaine.
This isn't typical mistletoe. It's extremely toxic.
Toxic? I struggled to reconcile the word and her apparent lack of concern. Perhaps she's testing me. I couldn't have had enough on my fingertips to cause a fatal reaction. Or so I thought until my throat began to swell. Do something. She waited as if expecting something.
Harfios. A gadjaya nithu.
The liniment that hurts the most is the best medicine. I had no idea how I knew what she'd said, or if I'd understood her at all. Mistletoe could cause hallucinations. One thing I knew for certain, I didn't have much time before my airway closed. Esmeralda repeated the Gaelic phrase. Memories that couldn't belong to me flashed in and out of my mind. Shifters with swollen faces, others with rotting wounds. Harte unconscious on the beach, his injured shoulder. Dumping my basket, I searched through the wax paper pouches until I found one containing pale blue flowers that reminded me of primroses. I crushed the blooms in my hand, added the bruised petals, and drank. The druidess clapped her hands.
Very good. You remembered.
Unimpressed, I dipped the hem of my skirt into the remaining liquid and pressed it to my mouth. Not only had my throat opened, but my lips and tongue had stopped stinging. I don't recall you teaching me how to counteract poison, but I remember doing it several times. How is that possible?
Don't be cross with me and don't mention the memories to Harte until the right moment. If you tell him too soon, you'll lose him. Soon, you will both come to understand everything.
She took my hands in hers and pressed a kiss to my cheek.
I promise.
Toxic. I struggled to reconcile the word and her apparent lack of concern. Perhaps she's testing me. I couldn't have had enough on my fingertips to cause a fatal reaction. Or so I thought until my throat began to swell. Do something.
Harfios. Agadjaya Nithu.
The liniment that hurts the most is the best medicine. I had no idea how I knew what she'd said, or if I'd understood her at all. Mistletoe could cause hallucinations. One thing I knew for certain, I didn't have much time before my airway closed. Hafios, Agadjaya Nithu. Esmeralda repeated the Gaelic phrase. Memories that couldn't belong to me flashed in and out of my mind. Shifters with swollen faces, others with rotting wounds. Harte unconscious on the beach, his injured shoulder. Dumping my basket, I searched through the wax paper pouches until I found one containing pale blue flowers that reminded me of primroses. I crushed the blooms in my hand, added the bruised petals, and drank. The druidess clapped her hands.
Very good. You remembered.
Unimpressed, I dipped the hem of my skirt into the remaining liquid and pressed it to my mouth. Not only had my throat opened, but my lips and tongue had stopped stinging. I don't recall you teaching me how to counteract poison, but I remember doing it several times. How is that possible?
Magic is a wonderful and fickle thing.
I understand, but how could you just stand there and wait for me to remember or die?
Don't be cross with me and don't mention the memories to Harte until the right moment. If you tell him too soon, you'll lose him. Soon, you will both come to understand everything.
She took my hands in hers and pressed a kiss to my cheek.
I promise.
No. Tell me now. I don't understand. I felt Harte's energy before he appeared, but I'd learned to accept weird and downright bizarre occurrences in my time with Esmeralda. After all, I'd almost gone into anaphylactic shock, while an honest-to-goodness druidess mumbled Gaelic proverbs. Harte knelt a few feet from us.
Esmeralda.
She stood and motioned to me.
Warden of Clan Birch. You will greet my acolyte with the same respect you show me.
Wide-eyed, he gaped at me, then the druidess, and back to me.
Eilís.
I had no idea if I should stand to acknowledge him, or if a nod would do. I'd spent my time exploring the island and discussing plants. The subject of druid protocols hadn't come up, neither had anything about acolytes, but I liked the sound of it.
You may rise. Warden.
Esmeralda winked at me.
I've come to take Eilís to my home, as you asked.
He didn't have dark circles under his eyes or slumped shoulders or a flat voice, but I knew he hadn't gotten much sleep. I could feel his exhaustion in my bones. Esmeralda stood a foot shorter than the dragon shifter, but she seemed to take up more than her fair share of physical space, likely because she held herself with the grace of a queen.
Very well. The other wardens will take your patrols. She is your priority. If any harm comes to her, I will hold you responsible.
I cringed. I bet he's thrilled about that. As if she'd heard my thoughts, the druidess winked at me again. I busied myself with placing the pouches back into my basket.
I will protect her with my life.
Harte bowed his head.
Let's see that it doesn't come to that. Warden.
She offered her hand and helped me to my feet.
I'll send for you again soon.
I'm looking forward to it. While I didn't appreciate the near-death experience, I hated to leave her. Esmeralda pulled me into an embrace, something she hadn't done before. She eased back and met my gaze.
I'll miss you until then. Eilís.
I took a step back. I'll miss you, too, Esme. Harte drew an audible breath. He'd gone slack-jawed, and the color had drained from his face. Are you all right? I reached for him, but he recoiled.
Great. Never better.
He cleared his throat.
It's a long walk back. We should get going.
I had a fairly good idea of the distance between the apple orchard and his house. My feet ached thinking about it. Why don't we fly? He folded his arms.
It's best if others don't see us in such a compromising position.
Esmeralda smacked his shoulder.
Nonsense. It will be dark by the time you get home on foot.
He turned to face her, which put his back to me.
You've charged me with protecting her. There are some who would see her harmed or shamed because of her race.
And they will not see you forcing the poor woman to walk miles like a pack animal.
She scoffed.
I will not have it. Fly her home. I will bring the matter of racism to the other druids. It is a cancer that must be stopped.
As you wish.
Harte wore the same disgusted expression he'd given me on the plane.
Let's go.
I had no idea what I'd done to piss him off this time, but I'd gotten some of my confidence back in my time with Esmeralda. What I wish is that you'd stop looking at me like I'm something stuck to the bottom of your shoe.
Chapter 17. Harte. The flight when I'd first met Eilís had held the top position for most awkward journeys of my life. But this trip bumped that one to number 2. She hadn't spoken to me since I'd shifted. Not a word. In fact, she'd done a damned good job at masking her emotions and stilling her mind. Esmeralda had taught her well. Too well. Eilís had changed in the previous 2 weeks. And I didn't like it. Her friendship with the druidess needled at me. Not that I minded her developing relationships with other people. Hell. I encouraged it because it'd make her life here more fulfilling. However, their parting was eerily similar to Esmeralda wishing her sister goodbye. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. Why did you call her Esme?
It's a nickname.
Her clipped tone stung like a barb in my underbelly.
Why do you care what I call her?
She shifted her weight between my shoulders. I don't. I quieted for a few minutes. And asked. Did she tell you to call her that? Eilís laughed. A humorless noise that sounded like a note played on an out-of-tune piano. The only person who has ever called her that was Aisling. Her twin. I drew a breath and braced myself for her response. She stilled.
I didn't know. I called her Esme once, and she seemed pleased.
I worked hard to keep my voice soft. Friendly even. Esmeralda took Aisling's death very hard. I'm concerned she's using you to fill the hole inside her.
This may come as a shock to you, but not everyone is made of iron like you are. There's nothing wrong with needing a friend to help heal one's grief.
Sounds like you're speaking from personal experience. All I'm saying is,
I can't decide if you're jealous or trying to control me or both. Either way, mind your own business.
this is my business.
No. Harte, you don't get to have it both ways. You made it clear you don't want me, and I don't need a daddy, so butt out.
This woman would be the death of me. I wanted to shake her until she came to her senses or throw her over my knee and spank her until her arse turned a nice shade of magenta. Or push her against the wall and make her scream my name. Damn it. I'd done it again. I'd slipped and fallen into the gutter rather than manning up and admitting I had feelings for her. Feelings that would lead to nothing but heartbreak and disappointment on both our sides. I'd spent the previous 2 weeks talking myself in circles. I thought I'd found a solution to the problem. But all of that had gone to shit. I sucked in a breath, held it in my gullet, and released it in a torrent of fire. Eilís screamed and clutched my horns. It's best if we don't speak until I shift. Feeling like a complete asshole. I stretched my wings and rode the air current toward the cliffs.
You know what? You're a jerk. I thought it when we first met, and I know it now. It's best we don't speak again. Period.
Either her shock or anger had broken down the walls she'd constructed. Her emotions poured through our bond. Jerk's too good for me. I'm an arse. I'm sorry. I frightened you. I meant it. I'd assumed she was scared. Angry. Maybe sad to leave Esmeralda. But I hadn't expected her to still have feelings for me. Unless I'd misinterpreted the reasons for her mental state. Eilís and I were together in our suffering. She stayed true to her word for the rest of the trip home. While I shifted. And during the walk into the kitchen. She took one look inside. Stopped. And turned on her heel.
What's that?
I tilted my head as if I had no idea what she referred to.
Why is there a compound light microscope on the kitchen table?
She pointed at the shiny new gadget. I'd taken advantage of her absence to work on a peace offering. Ian was right. She'd miss me when I left. So I'd come up with a way to keep her happy and distracted. I have a surprise for you. She set her basket on the floor and moved to the machine as if drawn by an imaginary force.
These cost thousands of dollars. Harte, I can't accept this.
Then you'll hate what I did to my study. Watching her fondle the knobs made me happier than it should have. And no. My mind hadn't drifted to fantasies of Eilís wearing nothing but a lab coat and silk stockings. She pushed past me and speed walked down the hall. This time when she screamed, it sounded less like a banshee and more like a teenage girl.
Oh my god.
I rested my shoulder against a door jamb while she flitted around the room I'd paid a small fortune to convert into a laboratory. I'm no scientist. I'm sure I forgot things. Make a list and I'll see that you have whatever else you need.
You did this for me.
Her words came out in a rushed, breathy whisper. I saw how you reacted to the dandelion in the birch grove. I thought you might want some equipment for research or whatever. Trying to play it cool. I shrugged. I'd never admit to her how I'd struggled to understand science enough to figure out the necessary contents of a botany lab. I'd never felt like such a moron. But I'd wanted to do it myself instead of sloughing it off on my assistant. Eilís launched herself at me. All four limbs wrapped around my body. She clung to me like a vine and covered my face with kisses.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's amazing. I'll call and see if the ferry company has my laptop, and I'll be back in business.
I must have tensed. Or she must have felt my apprehension because she released me. Her face fell.
I can't call anyone, and there's no internet here.
No. I'm sorry, love. I called about your luggage. But your things were sent home to your parents.
Of course, because they think I drowned.
Her voice cracked. And my heart broke. I wish things could be different for you. She nodded but avoided my gaze.
The lab is lovely, thank you. I think I'll go clean up before dinner.
I brushed her hair back from her face. I'll pick up a laptop next time I go to the mainland. We'll figure this out. Eilís.
I know we will.
She forced a smile.
But right now, I want to soak in that huge tub in the guest bedroom.
Their bedroom. I wanted her to settle into my space. To soak in my tub. To sleep in my bed. But Ian was right. I was selfish. I scratched my cheeks. The places where she'd kissed me had started to tingle. Eilís frowned.
Hey, you might want to wash your face. I poisoned myself with Tasmanian mistletoe earlier. It's unlikely, but I might have still had some on my lips.
The kind with the purple berries. My heart rate quickened to an adagietto.
Yep. My lips swelled, and I started to go into anaphylactic shock.
She made a face I couldn't quite interpret. I know jack about plants. But every kid on the island knows to stay away from those purple berries. They're deadly. Even to shifters. We call it deathweed.
Isn't that the same thing the hunters used?
She pressed her hand to her belly and took a step back as if to steady herself. Yes. And it's a good thing Esmeralda was there to help you. I wanted to find the druidess and have a little chat. She should have warned Eilís. Or kept a better eye on her. She dipped her chin.
Esmeralda didn't help me.
I barely heard her over the rush of blood behind my eardrums. What? Eilís wrapped her arms around herself the way she did when she was upset or frightened.
She said something about the worst tasting medicine heals the best, and watched while my throat closed.
That she'd taught you what to do to counter the poison. She shook her head and looked away. How did you know what to do? Your education and research?
No.
Eilís hung her head. I pulled her to my chest. To hell with playing it safe and not getting hurt or not hurting her or whatever other bullshit excuse I had to keep her at a distance. You could have died. She melted against me.
She wouldn't have let me die. It was a bizarre test or something. I must have passed because I'm still breathing. And she told you I was her acolyte.
I don't like it. I buried my face in her hair. Nothing she described made sense. But I intended to get to the bottom of it, druidess or not. Emerald had no right to put Eilís's life in danger.
Chapter 18.
Eilís.
Most little girls dreamed of a handsome prince riding to their rescue, but not me. I'd always dreamed of saving myself. I hated the idea of needing a man to make things better, but standing in Harte's arms, I couldn't deny it felt good to have someone looking out for me. Unfortunately, my savior would likely be the one who hurt me the most. I turned my face up toward his and met his eyes. I should go upstairs. He leaned in but appeared to think the better of it.
And I should wash your poisonous kisses off my face.
Good idea. I hated to keep things from him, but Esmeralda had asked me not to tell him about the strange memories. Thankfully, he'd made assumptions about how I'd acquired the knowledge. Wrong assumptions, but I hadn't corrected him. I'll cook dinner after my bath. It's time I started to earn my keep around here. I ducked beneath his arm and headed for the stairs.
We'll do it together. You've had enough potentially deadly substances today.
Harte followed close behind. Where are you going? My traitorous Harte hoped he planned to join me. He pressed his hand to his chest and gave me an innocent grin. Or tried to. He looked more like a dragon in sheep's clothing than a choir boy.
In my room to wash my face.
I reached the hall at the top of the stairs and hesitated. Let me know if you experience any other symptoms. I have more of the antidote.
Will do.
Harte stared through half-lidded eyes. He'd worn the same sexy rock star expression in countless photographs, but I couldn't shake the feeling I'd witnessed it while naked in his arms.
The hell with it.
He closed the distance between us and slanted his mouth over mine. The kiss started like any other kiss, lips on lips, but it evolved into tongue and teeth and hands, everything from the way his hips rolled against mine, to his hard length, to his fingers in my hair, to the sounds he made told me what it would be like to have sex with this beautiful man. He pulled back enough to nuzzle into my neck.
Let me make you forget everything for an hour or two.
His words and his warm breath left me speechless and wanting. We'd come so close before, but this time, I wouldn't stop him. I knew what to expect from our connection, or thought I did. Please. Harte scooped me up, carried me to his room, and deposited me on his bed.
Strip and get in bed while I wash my face.
In any other circumstance, I would have argued. Really, I would have. I didn't appreciate men who behaved like they belonged in the Stone Ages. However, the guy who played leading man in my fantasies promised to go down on me. I could set aside equal rights for a few minutes. I made quick work of my clothes and slid between sheets so soft they made silk feel like sandpaper. Harte returned wearing a pair of black boxer briefs and a grin.
Good girl.
I narrowed my eyes. Don't make me regret coming in here.
You prefer to be in charge.
Maybe I do. In all honesty, I had no idea what I preferred. My experience amounted to a string of forgettable encounters that left me wondering why I'd bothered working up a sweat when I had a battery-operated boyfriend and my imagination waiting for me at home. He handed me a cloth and a cup.
It's a natural mouthwash. Dip the rag and coat your lips. It'll remove battery acid. I'm sure it'll take care of deathweed residue.
Once again I did as I was told. The eucalyptus, mint, and citrus concoction made my mouth tingle. I think you're right. This stuff is amazing. He set the cloth and cup on the nightstand and stretched out beside me. I waited for what felt like an eternity for him to say or do something other than stare into my eyes. I might not have had a ton of sex in my life, but I knew nothing would happen with me below the covers and him above them. What's he waiting for? Has he changed his mind? What happened to the guy in the hall? I should go.
Eilís, do you plan to make a move or are you going to talk yourself out of this?
He bit his lip as if trying not to laugh. My brain screeched to a halt. Me? You're waiting for me.
You didn't take kindly to me ordering you about.
His voice deepened, which made his accent more pronounced. I wanted to laugh or smack him or climb on top of him, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything. Get under the blankets. Harte did as I asked and only as I asked. The big jerk seemed to enjoy his little game of make Eilís suffer.
Now what?
Determined to wipe the smirk from his face, I gathered up every ounce of courage in me, came to my knees, and straddled him. Not his hips, or his abdomen, his face. He made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a moan and ran his hands over my backside.
This, I could get used to.
The first swipe of his tongue made me regret my choice of positions. My thighs trembled to the point I worried I'd collapse and smother him. Harte, on the other hand, didn't seem concerned. He kissed and licked and teased until I moaned in frustration.
What's the matter, love?
He punctuated the question with a nibble on my inner thigh. I reached down, curled my fingers in his hair, and rolled my hips forward until I had his mouth exactly where I wanted it. He took the hint, digging his fingers into my thighs. He did something fantastic with his tongue. There, right there, I closed my eyes and rocked back and forth until I felt the pressure building inside me. Every movement, thought, and intention zeroed in on reaching my goal, but still, it evaded me. For several heartbreaking moments, I wondered if it would happen. And then it did. White-hot pleasure consumed me. I barely recognized my body. It seemed to have disconnected from my brain and moved on pure instinct. Sounds came from my lips that I was sure I'd never made before. Primal, urgent, and demanding. Harte shifted his weight beneath me. The next thing I knew I was flat on my back with his body pinning me to the mattress. His eyes had gone from human to dragon silver.
Let me mark you as my mate. You'll have your life back. Your freedom. All of it.
He trembled, giving me an idea of how hard he fought the urge to sink inside my body. My heart lurched. I wanted it. I wanted him. But I couldn't imagine how it would work. You're willing to go with me to Atlanta? He ran his fingertips down my cheek.
No, love. It'd be a means to an end. But not an easy one.
I pushed his shoulder to get him off me. I don't understand. Harte groaned, rolled to his side, and tugged me close.
As my mate, You would be allowed to leave Eileen Dragonstruck.
But I closed my eyes and breathed in his scent. How could someone feel so right and still be so damn wrong?
But it would be difficult on both of us to be apart.
He caressed my back in lazy circles. I had a feeling I knew where this would lead, but I wanted to hear him say it. Why would we have to be apart?
Your life is in Atlanta.
He eased back and met my gaze.
Eilís, I'm sorry, but I've already lost one mate. I cannot lose another.
Why? I hadn't stopped to consider the implications of the differences between us. Because I'll grow old.
Yes, please. Let me give you your life back.
The desperation in his voice made my breath hitch. I wanted to say yes, but it seemed wrong somehow. You're suggesting something like a marriage of convenience.
Yes.
He sighed as if relieved I'd finally come to my senses.
The longing for each other would be hard, but it'd fade in time.
Fade enough for me to fall in love with someone else. The part of me who suddenly understood Gaelic, and which flowers could cure death weed poisoning, knew the answer. I'd have the freedom to return to my life, but my heart would remain enslaved to him.
No.
He tucked my hair behind my ear.
It would be the same for me. We could agree to meet a couple times a year to sate our physical needs. But it would only make our parting that much more difficult.
I forced a smile and pulled away. Thank you for the offer. It means a lot you're willing to sacrifice so much for me. But my answer is no. Harte sat up.
It's only sex. Eilís. I'm willing to go without if it means you'll be happy.
I slid my hand-me-down blouse over my head and grabbed my skirt. That's just it. Harte. I wouldn't be content knowing I'd never have the chance to fall in love, get married, and have babies. I'd rather work hard and earn my freedom than to live a lie. He furrowed his brow.
But it's not a lie. We would be mates.
Do you love me? He turned his head. What little hope I had left inside me died. I would have fought heaven and earth to find a way to be with this man. But I couldn't make him love me. I understood how Siobhan must have felt when she'd come for dinner and found me in the kitchen. Only I had no one to blame. Clinging to my last shreds of dignity, I managed to keep my voice even. I want more than a supernatural bond. I deserve a man who will love me.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. I kissed his cheek and tugged on his hand. You've never led me to believe you cared more than you do. I'm happy to call you my friend.
With benefits.
He flashed me his famous grin, though I'd come to understand it was his way of masking his true self from the world. Sure, but you have droves of women who can give you benefits. I wanted to curl up and cry, but refused to put him on an emotional guilt trip. Instead, I pulled him toward me. Come downstairs. I'm starving.
All right. All right.
He tugged his jeans over his hips.
I'll be down in a minute.
I nodded and walked to the hall, thankful to have a few moments to myself. Turning him down had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I'd meant what I'd said. I refused to be tied to someone who didn't love me. 10 minutes later, Harte joined me in the kitchen. I pretended not to notice his watery eyes, and he pretended not to notice mine. He peeked over my shoulder at the vegetables I'd chopped for a stir-fry.
That looks good. But where's the meat?
He poked my side. I jumped and swatted his hand away. No tickling. It's vegetarian.
In case you missed it in biology class, dragons are carnivores.
He poked me again. I giggled despite myself and my bruised heart. Omnivores. And they don't teach dragon anatomy and physiology in Bio 101. The back door opened and a female called out.
Hello? Anyone home?
Harte cursed under his breath. We're in the kitchen, Siobhan. But you knew that already, didn't you? She rounded the corner and shrugged.
You look like shite. Cutting onions are you?
I opened my mouth to speak, but he stepped in front of me.
Something like that. What brings you all the way out here this time of night?
I've come to babysit your human.
Keeping himself between me and the female, he said.
There's no need. I'm not on patrol duty.
My heart sank. Not only had he allowed her to insult me, he'd all but agreed with her. Siobhan's smile reminded me of the old idiom, a fox in a hen house. She knew something we didn't. She dipped her chin and glanced away.
You haven't heard then?
His shoulders tensed.
Heard what?
When she looked up, she had tears in her eyes.
Adorn and Paydar were killed on patrol last night.
Harte tilted his head toward the ceiling and ran his hand over his jaw.
Where?
Just off the western coast. Some of the young ones heard the fight. The bodies washed up with the tide. Their wounds had rotted. It's like you said, they're using death weed.
She motioned to me.
I'll keep watch over Eilís. You're needed on patrol.
He hung his head.
They're too close and getting smarter with their attacks.
Siobhan narrowed her eyes, but smoothed her expression when Harte glanced at her.
Some folks are saying it's your human that led them here. But I don't believe it. I'll stay with her until dawn. Make sure no harm comes to her.
He turned to me and lowered his voice.
I have to go. Promise you'll stay inside until I return.
I trusted her as much as I trusted a coiled rattlesnake, but what choice did I have? The hunters had killed 2 shifters, and had nearly killed us. His people needed him far more than I did. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine here with Siobhan. Harte gave me a dubious look, pressed his lips to my brow, and turned to the fox shifter.
Anything happens to her, and you'll answer to me.
She'll be safe.
Siobhan tilted her head and exposed her neck. He touched her shoulder on the way out the door. A few moments later, a dragon's roar shook the windows and wings beat overhead. I turned to the sink to hide my face from the other woman. It made no sense, but I missed him already, not like a casual see you soon kind of feeling. The longing inside me seemed to originate in my soul. How would I survive his leaving for a year? Better question. How could he think we could become bonded mates and live apart? Siobhan slammed a jacket on the counter beside me.
Put this on. There's someone you should meet.
Chapter 19. Harte. I'd patrolled the same stretch of coastline, at the same time of year, with the same men, for almost 3 centuries. But everything was different. Clan Birch had lost 2 wardens, something that hadn't happened since the night Aisling died. The hunters had not only found, and apparently surrounded, Eilís Blair. They'd exploited our weakness of deathweed. Tonight of all nights I needed to have my wits about me, but my mind drifted to the little brunette in my kitchen. She'd told me to go, but a blind man could have seen the fear in her eyes. And there was Siobhan to consider. She might have pasted on a pretty smile, but she was trouble. The last time I'd returned home, she'd made her intentions clear. The fox wanted me and wouldn't take no for an answer. I'd barely escaped with my life, let alone my virtue. Ian flew 100 feet to my left and rear in order to ride in my draft and conserve energy. Speaking through our bond, he said.
Dude. You're kicking off massive amounts of heat. What's on your mind?
What do you make of Siobhan? She hates humans. But she's made it abundantly clear she wants to join us on tour. Ian snorted.
She's desperate to leave here. She's as racist as the leprechaun. But rumor has it she's been sneaking away to Dublin to meet someone.
My mouth went dry. Is she desperate enough to give the hunters deathweed?
No way. The girl's been in love with you since she was in pigtails. She wouldn't risk them using it on you. Or me for that matter.
I shouldn't have left Eilís alone with her. I'd sit the fox down for a long chat. I had no intention of dating her. But I valued our friendship enough to call her out on her bullshit. I wouldn't tolerate her prejudices against humans regardless of how things turned out between me and Eilís.
I'm surprised to see you here. I thought Esmeralda ordered you to protect her new protégé. You know the one? The woman you refused to claim.
It's none of your business. But I'm handling it. I scanned the water on the far side of the barrier. They were out there somewhere, waiting for a chance to kill more wardens.
You're going to claim her.
I tried, but she turned me down. I veered to the left and headed toward the harbor where I'd last seen the hunters. The area was outside our designated patrol. But we'd covered the same ground for hours and found nothing.
Oh. Shit. Sorry, bro.
He spoke as if I'd told him I'd lost my guitar hand.
But hey. Condolences and all.
There are no condolences. I'm going back on tour as planned. End of story. Movement on the other side of the barrier caught my eye. Look what we have here.
Hunters.
Ian growled.
Let's roast them. I'm starving.
A smaller boat, on our side of the magical wall, sped toward the larger vessel. Who is that and what the hell are they doing?
It's one of ours. I don't know, but they're too close to the barrier.
Keep your distance. It could be a trap. I flew over the sea to get a better look at the boat. Son of a bitch. Ian followed, but gasped and opened his wings to stop his forward momentum.
Tell me that's not your would-be mate down there.
I didn't trust myself to respond. The entire mate situation had become a moot point. Eilís had not only shot me down. It appeared she'd made a break for it as soon as I'd left the house. What did she do with Siobhan?
Are you kidding? The fox probably handed her a flashlight and kissed her goodbye.
The larger boat inched closer to the barrier protecting the island. Until then, I'd believed the magic had obscured the island from view to all except the wardens. But now I wasn't sure. They certainly appeared to have spotted Eilís.
How do you want to handle this?
Ian continued to stare at the situation unfolding below.
What is she doing?
I don't know. I racked my brain for an alternative explanation but came up empty. Eilís wasn't an innocent bystander pulled into a situation she had no control over. She was a hunter all along. I hadn't realized how much I loved her until that moment. My wounded pride made me want to fly past the barrier and incinerate both vessels. But I couldn't harm her. I could, however, snatch her from the boat and not stop flying until I reached Atlanta. I could understand her cozying up to me. But how could she have pretended to befriend Esmeralda? The druidess would be heartbroken when she learned of the betrayal. Ian flew closer to my side.
Make the call. Harte.
Let her go. I'm curious to see how this plays out. My dragon struggled for control. But I held him at bay. The beast knew only that she was in danger. It understood nothing of motives or betrayal or bone-wrenching disappointment.
And if this is a freakish coincidence?
Ian put distance between us. Though I could feel the tension rolling off his massive body. I don't believe in coincidences. I braced myself for what would happen next. I felt as if I were watching an oncoming collision. I couldn't turn away. I needed to see the carnage before I would be free of her. Eilís had reached the barrier. But the hunter's boat had turned in the opposite direction. My chest tightened. Had I made a mistake in assuming the worst? I focused on her energy through the beginnings of our bond and felt only fear and confusion. I'd expected determination. Or perhaps emptiness. But Eilís was terrified. Something's off. I don't think this was a rendezvous.
No shit.
Ian swatted me with his barbed tail.
Seriously? Dude. I heard Esmeralda made her an acolyte. Do you think the druidess would miss the fact she's a hunter?
He had a point. Esmeralda had a gift for scrying. The druidess could see the future clearer than most could see the present. You could have said something sooner.
And risk you turning all that pent-up aggression on me.
I couldn't argue. The entire to mate or not to mate situation had compromised my ability to lead. Whatever happened or didn't happen between me and Eilís. I had to get a handle on my emotions before I got someone killed. We have to get to Eilís before they spot her.
I'll follow your lead.
Ian circled overhead. Go under the water on this side of the veil. Cover me. I'll shift when I'm close to her. Without waiting for his response. I stretched to my full length and caught a downdraft, hitting the water at full speed. I tucked my wings and torpedoed toward Eilís. Rapid, high-pitched squeals, like a supersonic jackhammer, battered against my eardrums. It took a millisecond for me to register the noise. And another to realize we were in serious trouble. Behind me, Ian called out.
Shift. They are using sonar.
I couldn't change forms. Not yet. I hadn't reached my mate. Get Eilís. I'll distract them.
You're closer.
Ian breached the surface before I could argue. I reached the tiny craft, shifted to human form, and came up for air. Waves pushed me this way and that. But I managed to grab the rope on the side of the boat. Eilís, jump.
The motor died. There's a larger vessel at my 5 o'clock.
She shouted over the roar of the water. At some point, the female must have realized the seriousness of her situation. Because she'd woven the straps of a donut-shaped life preserver around her upper arms. Hunters. A larger wave crested over the side of the boat and dragged me under. If not for the mooring line, it would have pulled me out to sea. I surfaced coughing and gasping for breath.
We can't make it back to shore from here.
She glanced around as if trying to figure out how she'd gotten there. Ian's dragon roared overhead, followed by the whoosh of a harpoon gun. A torrent of fire lit the night. Enough for me to gauge the distance between us and the other vessel. Too damned close. Ian's going to get himself killed. You've got to trust me. Jump. She clutched the flotation device closer to her chest.
It's too cold.
You have to trust me. I'd given her little to no reason to do so. Everything I'd done for her had been to suit my needs. Not hers. Hell. I'd refused to answer when she'd asked if I loved her. Baby. Please. Jump. I'll keep you safe. I swear. She tore her eyes from the sky. Turned. And leaped into the water. Swim. I'm right behind you. I dove beneath the water until my lungs screamed for want of air. And pushed further. White spots danced in the corners of my eyes. And still. I swam. I couldn't shift with her nearby without risking impaling her on a spike. But the icy water would kill her if I didn't hurry. I released control and let the dragon take over. He broke free and headed straight for Eilís. While the human part of me struggled to gain its bearings, the dragon had no such problem. He jerked his mate to his chest and took to the sky.
Got her.
Ian called from the far side of the hunter's boat. Yes. Get out of there. The sounds of gunfire filled the night air. I turned in time to see Ian's body jolt from the impacts. I changed course and flew a wide circle around the boat. How bad are you hit?
I'll live. But I need to bail soon.
Take Eilís. I'll deal with them. I met him on the far side of the harbor. Blood marred the softer scales on his belly. But none of the wounds appeared life-threatening. Were the bullets poisoned?
Don't think so. But they got my wing.
He eased her into his claws and cradled her to his chest like a hatchling.
Be careful.
Will do. Now go. I opened my wings and flew toward the heavens before I changed my mind. Placing her in the care of another male went against my every instinct. But I wouldn't retreat until I'd eliminated the threat. I blew through a cloud bank and hovered. Without cover, I would have eclipsed the stars and given away my location. Aerial attacks were risky. Normally, I would have hit the boat from below. But their sonar had forced my hand. I waited until the boat passed directly below me, unleashed a column of fire, and darted to the next clump of clouds. The men below managed to get off several rounds. Luckily, I had science on my side. Blue flames in an otherwise dark sky made it difficult to see. And one needed to see to hit a moving target, or so I hoped. Screams replaced gunshots. But I held my position. The acrid stench of burning man-made material stung my nostrils. And still, I waited. One of two things would happen. Either the hunters would make a break for it on the escape raft attached to the side of the vessel, or the fuel tanks would blow. The explosion lit the night sky like a miniature sun.
Chapter 20.
Eilís.
Whoever said reptiles were cold-blooded had never met a dragon. I stood in an enormous shower, but the 7 jets of hot water couldn't compare to the warmth of the man's skin. Be it his nature or some trick of magic, he radiated a heat that permeated my flesh and settled into my bones. I'd promised myself I would put some boundaries between us, but standing there, silent in Harte's arms, all I felt was peace. And then he ruined it.
What were you thinking?
He practically growled and snatched a shampoo bottle from the recessed shelf. I don't know, but I never would have gotten into that tiny boat of my own free will. Suddenly very aware of my bare breasts, I folded my arms.
What do you mean? You don't know?
He turned me around and eased my head beneath the stream of water. I remember following Chev on outside. She said something about a meeting. I struggled to recall her exact words, but the memories rested out of my reach. I grasped onto the only thing I could trust, my anger. It kept me upright and sane in a situation that was anything but. Everything's fuzzy. I don't remember leaving the grounds.
It's all right. You're safe now.
Harte worked the shampoo into my hair with a tenderness that threatened to break me into a million pieces. I doubted anywhere on Eilís Blair was safe for me, but his fingers massaging my scalp made me want to believe him. What did she do to me? Why can't I remember? He angled my head to rinse the shampoo.
Siobhan doesn't have the kind of abilities you're describing. She must have had an accomplice. Someone with the power to mesmerize humans.
Mesmerize. I eased away and wrapped my arms around myself. You're saying someone hypnotized me? Harte squirted a dollop of conditioner into his hands and motioned for me to turn.
It's not like in the movies. You aren't going to cluck like a chicken every time someone snaps their fingers. Mesmer is a type of spell. Most of the time it's used as a precautionary means to confuse a human into forgetting what they've seen.
After everything I'd experienced, creatures doing spells on humans shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the feel of his fingers running through my hair. Nothing about me getting into a tiny boat and motoring into the North Sea made sense. I'd studied the weather and the currents before my trip. I knew the conditions this time of year varied from moderately choppy to waves that could capsize an ocean liner, and that the sea could change with little or no warning. Mesmerize. Make humans forget. I spun around and grabbed his arms. Why can't we find someone to mesmerize me into forgetting this place? The ferry. Meeting you. All of it. Harte winced as if I'd struck him. Don't you see? I could go home. You wouldn't be stuck with me. You'd be free. I puzzled over his faraway expression and the creases in the corners of his eyes. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought I'd heard him. It's not that simple, is it? He shook his head.
You've spent too much time here. Mesmer spells only work with small bits of time.
Oh. My chest tightened and my eyes burned. I needed to process everything that had happened, and I didn't want him to witness my impending meltdown. Could I have a few minutes alone?
In a minute. There's something I need to say to you first.
Harte took my face in his hands and forced me to meet his eyes.
When I realized you were in danger, I had one regret.
None of this was your fault, Siobhan.
Okay. 2 regrets.
He swallowed hard.
I love you. I should have told you when you asked me. But I was afraid.
I stared into his eyes and fought to hold back my tears.
Eilís.
He ran his thumb over my cheek.
This is the part where you're supposed to say something.
I choked on the emotion clogging my throat. I love you, too. But it doesn't change anything. He dropped his hands to my shoulders.
It changes everything.
I'm still human with a much shorter expiration date than you. Harte winced and drew me into an embrace.
I don't care. I'd rather spend the next 50 or so years loving you than regretting letting you go.
I pulled away and turned my back to him. Please, I need a few minutes to myself to think. He cleared his throat.
I'll get out of the shower. But I'm not leaving the bathroom.
I watched him go and caught my misty reflection in the mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw the kaleidoscope eyes of a druidess staring back at me. I hurried from the shower and cleared the steam from the glass.
What's wrong?
He turned me to face him. Do my eyes look weird? I opened them wide. Harte shook his head. I turned back to the mirror and couldn't look away. It felt as if a force reached out and pulled my head toward my reflection. Only I no longer saw myself or Harte or the bathroom. The reflection had morphed into a small crowd, an angry crowd carrying torches and weapons. I searched the creatures' faces, 2 humanoid and 3 animal.
Eilís, you're freaking me out.
He rested his hand on my shoulder, and the scene in the mirror broadened. I recognized the heather fields outside the house, and more troubling, I recognized Siobhan walking with a man half her height. Do you see that? Harte glanced from me to the mirror, and back.
Stars in the heavens. Are you scrying?
I'd never heard the term, but I knew its meaning, just like I'd known which flowers to counteract the poison and recognize the stone on the beach, and knew things about the man beside me I had no right to.
What did you see?
He turned me to face him and stumbled back.
Your eyes.
Downstairs, glass shattered. A heartbeat later, an explosion rocked the house. It shouldn't have been possible over the roar of flames. But I heard Siobhan and the 6 others chanting a spell. They hadn't thrown Molotov cocktails, they'd thrown magic. Harte grabbed a robe from the back of the door and wrapped it around my shoulders.
Let's go.
Struggling to shove my wet arms into the sleeves, I followed him to the glass doors leading to his balcony. No, wait, they'll see us. He hesitated, but turned and dragged me into the hall.
The crow's nest.
Another ball of magical fire burst through a window on the lower level of the house. The floor beneath our feet groaned. Flames engulfed the visible parts of the first story, and the second floor began to collapse. The entire structure would fall in on itself before long. Go! I screamed and shoved him toward the stairs leading to the observation deck on the roof. The words of a spell hung on the tip of my tongue. I raised my arms and prepared a counterattack. Harte broke my concentration and tossed me over his shoulder. Put me down. I can do this. I battered his back, but he refused to budge. My lab, your house.
Forget the house. We'll build a new one.
He tightened his grip on the way up the winding staircase.
When we get to the top, stay away from the railing. I'll shift, then circle back to get you.
No, there's no time. Hold me and leap from the side facing the sea. Just make sure you catch me when I fall. My heart pounded and my lungs burned, but I laughed. I had absolute trust in this man. A part of me that I'd forgotten long ago remembered him, remembered us, remembered a similar escape. Harte went as still as the grave.
Aisling, is it really you?
Go. We don't have time to talk.
Chapter 21. Harte. The magic burst from me, stretching and changing flesh and bone, turning skin to scales, and nails to talons. The dragon roared its way into existence like a wailing newborn. He wanted his mate. The druidess who had perished over 2 centuries before had returned and was in danger. The beast dove toward the sea, positioned itself beneath the falling woman, and rolled to his back to soften her landing. Eilís hit the dragon's belly, bounced once, and scrambled for something to hold onto. I wrestled control from the dragon and rotated in a half-barrel roll. Eilís grabbed a spike to stop her fall. Once steady, she used a hand-over-hand maneuver to grapple the next horn and the next, until she found her footing between my shoulder blades.
Circle back on my command.
No freaking way. We're going to the birch grove to find Esmeralda. The druids can dole out justice. I veered to the right hard enough to throw her off balance. She shifted her weight like a surfer riding a wave and remained on her feet.
They'll get away. At least let me mark them.
I growled. Did you miss the part where they're throwing magic bombs? She stopped her foot.
Did you miss the part where I suddenly have Ashling's memories? Plus, you breathe fire.
I said no.
Harte, I'm serious. Take me back, or I'll jump.
She stepped to the edge of my back. I'd always said she'd be the death of me. Why should realizing that Eilís was the reincarnated soul of my lost mate make a difference? I will when you sit down. She held onto a horn at the base of my neck and went to one knee.
I have to be able to visualize the target.
Despite my house burning to the ground and an angry crowd of fire-throwing villagers, my heart soared. She might share Ashling's memories. But the woman on my back was the little Navy vet, science nerd, who'd pulled me from the sea. I opened my wings and rode the updraft to the top of the cliff. Ready. Eilís's determination combined with Ashling's magic to form one hell of a counterattack.
Jibe ho!
As I'd planned, we breached the top of the cliff on the left side of the fire and used the smoke as cover. I counted 5 people. She unleashed the spell. A split second later, the members of the hate squad ran screaming as if chased by the slaw.
We're missing Siobhan and a short, squat male.
We'll find them. Hang on. I pumped my wings to gain altitude and flew ever-widening circles around the ruins of my home. What did you do to them?
I created a swarm of heat-seeking wasps.
She giggled and ran her hands over the base of my spikes like Aisling used to.
They'll be easy to spot in a crowd.
Remind me never to get on your bad side. I laughed harder than I had in too long to remember.
I think we've lost them.
Eilís settled onto my back. I'll take us to the birch grove. Esmeralda will want to see you. Her tension seeped into my muscles and formed a knot in my neck. Tell me what's wrong or you're going to have to massage away a dragon-sized tension headache.
I'm not her, you know.
I know.
Do you?
The uncertain tone in her voice pulled at my heartstrings. You use terms like visualize the target, jibe ho, and heat-seeking wasps. Aisling died when military units fought with muskets. The soul holds one's magic. The life you've lived and experiences you've had shape your personality. You're my Eilís. But you carry Ashling's magic.
And her memories.
I felt her curl into a ball and pictured her holding her middle as if to keep herself whole.
Not all of them. Only the ones related to magic. And you.
I wanted nothing more than to hold her. But that would have to wait. Yes. And her memories of me because whether you care to believe it or not, mating isn't a chemical reaction in the brain. It is the purest form of magic.
And yet, we've both resisted it.
Her despair washed over me like a funeral dirge. Because we're both fools. She laughed and seemed to perk up, only to sink back into her thoughts.
What if Esmeralda is disappointed?
She's likely already seen the conversation we are about to have. I caught movement from the corner of my eye and turned my head in time to see Siobhan and Owen, the racist leprechaun, waiting in a clearing near the birch grove. There they are. Feel free to blast a leprechaun into oblivion. Eilís gathered her magic. But a fireball the size of a small car slammed into my neck before she could release it.
Harte.
Pain roaring through my body. I jolted to the left hard enough to send Eilís scrambling for a handhold. A dragon could walk through natural flames. However, Owen hadn't lobbed your garden variety bonfire at us. The spell he'd used coated my scales with an oily substance that seeped between and beneath them. I needed to smother it with sand. But I didn't dare fly over the sacred grove for fear of burning the trees. Eilís cast spell after spell. But nothing extinguished the blue flames.
You have to get to the sea.
Water will make it worse. I have to smother it. Take the leprechaun out before he casts another one. I pooled every ounce of my remaining energy and circled back.
Tachta.
Eilís's voice rang out through the clearing below. Owen gripped his throat and went to his knees, as if an invisible force had closed his windpipe. Siobhan turned and ran. And several druids stepped from the tree line. A bold male I didn't recognize from the distance motioned for me to land.
Where's Esmeralda? Do you trust them?
Eilís sounded frantic. Struggling to stay aloft. I muttered. Call to her. Her energy shifted. But I could no longer feel her intentions or emotions. The fire had made its way into muscle and would soon burn through the major blood vessels in my neck. I had a matter of minutes before the spell would take my head from my body. I did my best to land without injuring Eilís. But we hit the ground hard enough to rattle the buildings in the village.
Help him.
She scrambled down and hurried into my line of vision. Siobhan rushed forward, grabbed Eilís by her hair, and kicked the back of her knee to force her to the ground.
You will kneel before them.
I will not kneel before my equals.
She caught the fox shifter with a jab to her gut and broke free. The bold druid spat on the ground.
You are a human who has learned a few tricks.
Eilís motioned to the lot of them.
And you are nothing more than acolytes on a power trip.
She was right. Not a single one of the wannabe druid's eyes swirled with magic. I nudged her side. Find Esmeralda. And never forget I truly love you.
Chapter 22. We stood feet from the healing energy of the sacred grove, but it may as well have been miles away. I called to Esmeralda until my head throbbed. On some level, I knew magic, like any other natural resource, would run dry if not replenished. Yet, I continued to reach out to the druidess. Esme, my soul sister, my mate needs you.
Find Esmeralda. And never forget I truly love you.
Harte's words stopped me cold. The flames had gone out, but the scales along his neck continued to crackle. Several littered the ground around him. Whatever the leprechaun had done to him hadn't ended. I searched my memories for a spell or a plant or anything that could help to stop the damage, and came up short. The female acolyte tilted her head.
Who are you then?
I am Eilís. I carry the soul of Aisling, sister of Esmeralda. Pushing past the heat emanating from his body, I placed my hand on Harte's muzzle and pulsed my remaining energy into him. I had to keep him alive long enough to heal him. She folded her arms.
If what you're saying is true, then it should be nothing for you to prove it to us.
I started to motion to the dead leprechaun, but thought the better of it. I doubted they would react well to me admitting I'd killed one of their kind. Chewing her lower lip, Siobhan stared at Harte.
He's dying. If what you're saying is true, why haven't you healed him?
I'd spent enough time arguing. I needed to do something fast. Rather than turning my back on the others, I moved to his other side. The birch trees sang to me. I could almost see their energy pushing against the boundary of the grove. I had to move him, but he had to weigh as much as a T-Rex. Harte, can you hear me?
Yes.
His voice sounded distant, as if he'd answered from across the field. I ran my hand down his muzzle. I need you to shift.
Burning.
Gaelic words flashed through my mind like cards spinning on a Rolodex, and settled on oost. Water. No. He said it would make it worse. I considered the original blue flames and the heat that continued to emanate from his neck. Is it a magic version of an ethanol fire? Alcohol floats on water. Dousing him would make the flames spread. I needed a special class of extinguisher, but doubted I could recreate a chemical compound from thin air. Or could I? I conjured a mental image of the thick foam and drew energy from the ground beneath my bare feet. Toochk. A column of white goo shot from my palms and curled around Harte's neck. The acolytes spoke amongst themselves, but I'd stopped listening or caring. I remained planted in the dragon sightline. Once the foam stopped the invisible flames, I'd need to get him to the grove. Siobhan gasped.
Your eyes?
I resisted the urge to turn and glare.
I never meant for them to hurt him.
Her voice rose too high and too loud, as if she verged on hysteria. I motioned for her to come closer. He's going to shift soon. When he does, we're going to move him into the grove. I need you to support his neck. Siobhan nodded. You're not going to hurt him.
Why would I think that?
She stared with wide eyes. Harte drew a shaky breath. One moment, my hand rested on his scaly face. The next it hung in midair. In human form, he curled into the fetal position, shimmered into view. As I'd feared, burns covered his neck and shoulders. Now, I hurried forward and waited, while the fox shifter struggled to find a place to support his cervical vertebrae. Hold him.
I can't. You do it. I'll lift him.
Siobhan cried out. I curled my fingers around his neck and pressed the base of his skull forward with my thumbs. My goal was simple. Keep the gaping wound on the front of his neck from opening. Go. She cradled him in her arms and hurried to the tree line. Place him on his side, slowly. I moved with her until Harte rested on the cool, damp earth.
Now what?
Siobhan stood and shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Keep the others away. I opened the robe and pressed my bare chest to his back.
What are you doing? Why isn't he healing?
Warming him. He's ice cold. I refused to answer her other question. I would not give credence to my deepest fear by speaking it aloud. Send for druids. She motioned to the group of acolytes.
They are trained. Let them assist you.
I considered a request, her agitation, and her concern for Harte. I suspected she didn't want to call for help because she worried for her own hide, but I doubted she would willingly harm my mate. The girl thought she loved him. They can help, but you will go now and find a druid gifted with healing.
As you say.
She gave me an odd look and dipped into an awkward curtsy. I wrapped my arms around him and hummed the melody to my favorite solstice song, the one Harte had written about Eilís Blair. All but the bald acolyte circled around us, and I made a point to meet each of their gazes. Like it had happened with Siobhan, I had a sense of their intentions. While they each held varying degrees of fear, none seemed to harbor malicious intent.
He needs warmth.
The female removed her cloak and covered Harte and me, before kneeling at his calves and placing her hands on his feet. I nodded to the female, who looked to be about 16 in human years. Can someone make a salve of St. John's wort and calendula flowers?
I can. Comfrey is good for burns as well.
One of the males turned and hurried into the forest. A second boy followed him. The female offered me a shy smile.
He will have healed by the time they return.
I hoped she spoke the truth. It's good to give them something useful to do. Harte's body temperature remained dangerously low by human standards, and the man normally ran hot.
We meant no disrespect. We were not told of your identity. Or of your mating with the warden.
I might have Ashling's magic, but it had not come with a guide to druid law. Be that as it may, you pass judgment on me because of my race. Aren't druids humans?
Yes. But we have magic.
She bowed her head. And humans have science.
Is that how you put out the unseen flames?
I used my knowledge of science to choose the correct spell.
You saved him.
She glanced at Harte and sighed the sigh of a young girl looking at a rock star. Rather than saying anything else to chastise or diminish hers and the others' roles in the situation, I fell back on girl talk. He is a pretty one.
That he is.
Her cheeks burned brighter.
Eilís. You may go and take the others with you.
Esmeralda's voice caused us both to startle.
Blessed be.
The acolyte bowed and hurried into the grove. I craned my neck to get a look at the druidess. I called for you. She moved to the space Eilís had occupied and seated herself.
I know.
Why didn't you come? I wondered if I would ever understand Esmeralda. Her every action seemed like a lesson tied in a bow of suffering. She reached forward and brushed Harte's dark hair from his brow.
You didn't need me.
Like hell I didn't. He suffered needlessly because of you. She raised a brow. Don't give me that look. The druidess held up her hands.
It was difficult for me to wait in the shadows. But I foresaw two possible futures. Had I intervened, you both would have perished.
The acolytes. I thought back to the moment they'd stepped from the grove. Where's Siobhan?
She has been detained and will be punished for her betrayal.
You mean executed? I shivered. Esmeralda pulled the acolyte's cloak to my chin.
I'm afraid so.
I will stand for her. Banish her if you must. But she's young. She acted out of jealousy, and I saw remorse in her. She lowered her voice.
Eilís. Her crime started before you arrived. Siobhan is responsible for the deaths of Aidan and Paydar. She gave her human lover, a hunter, death we'd extract.
Harte almost died twice because of her, had it not been for. I thought back to the night I'd fallen off the ferry, the mysterious stranger who healed him.
Was you.
Esmeralda grinned. I should be thrilled, but I want to punch someone right now. I nuzzled against Harte to ground my anger. As much as I wanted revenge, I hated the thought of more bloodshed. Siobhan's greatest wish was to leave Eilís Blair. Executing her will give her a new start. Perhaps it's better to bind her to this land.
Spoken like a true warrior. I see you, sister.
She laughed and took my hand.
I have since the first moment I laid eyes on you.
Her words felt like a kick to the kidneys. I'm not Aisling.
No, you are more. Her spirit has learned and grown in this lifetime. But you are still a warrior masquerading as a healer.
I thought about that for a moment. I was a warrior or a sailor, but that wasn't my true calling. I will fight for my patients and those I love, but I am most alive when the plants sing to me. That made her smile, a real smile that softened her otherwise stoic expression.
You've never told me you hear their music.
I didn't believe it myself until I made room in my brain for magic and science. Esmeralda bit her lip as if trying to hold back laughter.
May I join you in warming your mate?
I wrinkled my nose. Only if you stay on top of the cloak.
Still jealous of my status as the older and more beautiful sister.
Older by 2 minutes, and we are no longer twins. You are by far the fairest of them all. Esme, I'm wise enough to know it's best not to tempt fate until after Harte and I are truly bonded. This time she did laugh, and I joined her.
Chapter 23. Harte. I'd woken up in some strange places. But I'd never come to in a sacred grove wrapped in the arms of two beautiful druidesses. Memories of the night before killed the buzz of the feminine energy surrounding me. The freaking leprechaun had aimed the fire at my neck. I made my livelihood off my vocal cords. I reached for my throat and forced myself to swallow. It hurt. But not nearly as bad as I'd expected. I wanted to run through my scales to test my range. But I hated to wake the women. Instead, I eased to my other side and faced Eilís. In sleep, she reminded me of a porcelain doll, with her pale skin and dark lashes resting on her cheeks.
She is lovely.
Esmeralda whispered over my shoulder. What is today lucky for, druidess? I sounded as if I'd gargled with battery acid.
Claiming your mate.
She moved away from me and cold air replaced her body heat. My voice.
Will heal.
She stood.
Are you so eager to return to the stage?
Was I? I searched my soul for the answer and came up wanting. I don't know.
Wrong answer.
She kicked my arse with her bony foot and stormed away.
Didn't anyone ever tell you it's bad luck to piss off a druidess?
Eilís muttered and nuzzled into my chest. I wrapped my arms around her and breathed in her scent. How can you smell so good after leaving a burning house and sleeping on the ground?
Don't forget riding a burning dragon.
I won't anytime soon. I ran my hand from her shoulder to her naked backside. Where are your clothes?
You mean the bathrobe?
She eased back and met my gaze.
It's around here somewhere. I stripped down to keep you warm.
My brain skipped a beat.
You were ice cold. I thought I'd lost you.
Never. I gave her a smile. But I figured she'd see right through it.
How do you feel?
Grateful and a little sore. She pushed me to my back, rested her head on my shoulder, and draped her arm and thigh over me. Keep doing that and I'm going to feel a different kind of stiff.
This?
She pressed closer and wiggled her perfect arse. I pushed her to her back and crawled over her body.
And what do you think you're doing?
She draped her arms over my shoulders. Kissing you? I pressed my mouth to hers. The kiss wasn't as heated as our others. But it held such need that it took everything I had to pull away from her.
Harte, we should talk about this.
I looked into her eyes, grinned and kissed a trail down to her breast. But when I tried to dip my head lower, Eilís tugged at my shoulders.
I'm serious. What are we doing?
It's called foreplay. I brushed my lips over hers. She sighed and turned her head.
I heard what you said to Esmeralda. You should know that I intend to stay here and conduct research. When I'm ready, I will return to Atlanta to share my findings.
And there it was. She'd laid it out for me like an ultimatum. But little did she know. I had a counter-offer. I'd like to finish my tour. I have 5-10 years tops before Solstice has to disband. She cocked her head.
Why?
Ian and I don't age. Unlike Keith Richards. We can't continue to look the same forever.
That makes sense.
A smile tugged the corners of her lips.
You realize my misfortune of being born to human parents is irrelevant, right?
I do. Druids don't age as long as they visit the groves a couple of times a year. I nuzzled into her neck.
Will you tour the entire 10 years?
She ran her hands down my back. For the first time, I considered the situation without a hefty dose of wishful thinking. It's more like 5 years, if I'm being honest. And no, we have time for 3 albums and 3 tours. Eilís bit her lower lip. What's going on in that beautiful head of yours?
I could come with you. My research can wait a few years.
Yeah? My heartbeat in triple time.
Unless having me along would cramp your style.
Hardly. I traced the seam of her lips with my tongue before delving into her mouth. Eilís kissed me back with the same slow-building passion I'd given her. She drew her knees up and wrapped her legs around my waist. I murmured against her mouth. I don't have a condom, and it's my lunar cycle. She giggled.
Is that something like your period?
I bit her lower lip hard enough to elicit a moan. It means we're far more likely to conceive a child.
Oh.
She shoved my shoulder.
Why is it every time we come close to having sex, something gets in the way?
You don't want to be a mother. We hadn't discussed it. But I'd always wanted enough children to form a rock band.
I do, very much. But now,
My darling, you're a druidess now. I'm sure you can concoct some sort of tea or tincture to prevent conception if now doesn't work for you. But I'm cool with bringing a kid on the road with us.
the gods won't bless us with new life if it isn't our time.
You're beginning to sound too much like Esmeralda. I pressed my hips forward. So it's a go.
Roger that.
I locked eyes with Eilís and joined our bodies. Each small fraction forward ignited a fire inside me. Until it took every ounce of my willpower to hold back. She gripped me tighter with her thighs. But I held in place and allowed her to rock against me while not giving her another inch. Do you want something?
You.
I drew her earlobe between my teeth and eased in a little more. I could feel her frustration. But also her growing desire. I had no intention of slamming into her like a hormonal teenager.
Harte, please you won't break me.
I thrust forward, burying myself inside her to the root. Eilís gasped, digging her nails into my shoulders. She rocked her hips beneath me. But I doubted the position gave her the friction where she needed it. Growling in frustration, she dropped her legs, grabbed my arse, and pushed me where she wanted me. I held myself up on one elbow and turned her face toward mine. Look at me. She opened her eyes and held my gaze as I drew back and pressed forward, over and over. The slow pace accentuated the movement, intensifying the sensation, yet a release remained elusive. Eilís turned her head.
I never come like this.
I'm not giving up yet. I had a hunch I knew how to get her where she needed to be. Lowering my cheek to hers, I sang the lyrics to her favorite song. When she relaxed, I changed the old in out to grinding circles. She gasped.
How did you know?
Lucky guess. Her moans grew more urgent and her thighs trembled. She came apart so suddenly that it seemed to take her by surprise. I struggled to hold back, but I wanted to draw out her pleasure. Mark me. Eilís wrapped her legs around my waist, as if refusing to let me go, and raked her nails down my back, marking me as hers. I tensed until I thought my muscles would cramp, and called my dragon to the surface enough to elongate and sharpen my upper canines, exhaling her name upon my release. I buried my face in her breasts and nicked her skin. Eilís moaned her approval. Magic flared between us in a starburst of blue light. The connection we'd shared since we'd first met solidified into a bond so tight it was as tangible as any other part of my body. I brushed my lips across her cheek to her mouth. The kiss felt different, almost reverent. I eased to my side and pulled her along with me. You're amazing.
Sorry I took so long.
She closed her eyes and snuggled closer. Remember what I told you the first time we met. Never apologize for your passion. I caressed her back. I enjoyed learning how much my voice turns you on. Wrapped warm and safe in my arms, Eilís whispered.
I believe my soul recognized you the first time I heard you sing.
A melody played through my head, followed by lyrics of love lost and found, of stubbornness, of hope, of Eilís.
Chapter 24.
Eilís.
6 months later, I stared at the stranger in the mirror. She wore skin-tight black jeans and a slinky tank top that revealed entirely too much skin. Nope. I shook my head. Forget it. I'm not going in public like this. Sarah finished applying my lipstick and took a step back.
You look hot. Harte's going to pass out when he sees you.
I'd rather he remain conscious until after the concert. I leaned closer to the mirror and frowned. Seriously, I think this shade of red is illegal south of the Mason-Dixon line. My mother knocked and opened the bedroom door. She took one look at me and sniffled.
The car's downstairs. You girls look amazing.
She hadn't stopped crying since the media had exploded with stories of mine and Harte's rescue from an uninhabited island in the Shetlands. She'd never forgive me if she knew we'd called the authorities and reported sightings of possible castaways before marooning ourselves on the glorified rock. Mom, don't cry, I promise. Harte and I will come home as often as we can between shows. I pulled her into an embrace. She squeezed me until I thought my ribs would crack.
Don't mind me.
Sarah joined us in the hug.
And if she doesn't, you and I will follow the band around like groupies.
My mother snatched a tissue from the counter and blew her nose.
Don't think I won't. I didn't get to see my only child walk down the aisle.
Harte poked his head into the room and his mouth fell open.
Wow. Eilís. Wow. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to get going.
1 sec. It's not like they're going to start without you. I gave him a playful shove and closed the door. I wasn't going to say anything yet, but...
You're pregnant!
My mom's hands flew to her mouth.
Oh my god.
Sarah gripped the counter as if to hold herself upright. I closed my eyes and drew a breath. Between my parents and the tabloids, you'd think we had nothing else going on in our lives besides trying to get knocked up. No, not yet. We've decided to wait a little while. Spend some time just the two of us before we settle down and have children. Sarah cracked a grin.
Then what's the news?
We're buying a house on Tybee Island. Nothing crazy. Just somewhere we can relax in the sun.
That's wonderful. But you're both always welcome here.
Mom smiled, but I could tell she preferred a grandchild to a daughter with an address in the adjacent zip code. I worried for her if and when the day came that Harte and I would need to remain on Eileen Dragonstruck. Esmeralda and I were working on temporary aging spells. So far, we'd had only minimal success, but the druidess assured me she saw my parents and Sarah long into my future. Harte knocked again.
You're killing me, lass.
I opened the door and pretended to glare, a wasted effort on a man that could sense my moods better than a Labrador retriever. We're ready. He ran his hand over his stubbly chin.
You planning to wear a jacket over that top?
Nope. She's a rock star's wife. She needs to look the part or the trolls who follow you on Twitter will rip her to shreds.
Sarah hooked her arm in mine and dragged me past him. I glanced over my shoulder and stopped short. Harte and my mother stood with their heads together, whispering. She glanced between us and smiled. I hadn't seen her eyes twinkle like that since before I'd left for Brewery. What are they up to?
Harte got us VIP tickets. Dad and I will see you at the arena.
She hurried into her bedroom. Harte gave me a bashful smile, the one that revealed the parts of him he reserved only for me.
Harte. The roar of the crowd shook the stage beneath my feet. We'd finished our final set, but I had one last song to share with the world and my favorite girl. I took a bow and swapped my electric guitar for the vintage Martin I'd purchased in the 1930s. I stepped to the microphone. I'd like to dedicate the last song of the night to the woman who taught me how to love again. The audience cheered. I motioned to the guys in the control booth. The stage went dark. A moment later, a soft filtered spot illuminated me. What do you say? Would you like to meet Eilís? Some of you might remember her as clueless at 50,000 feet. I glanced to my left and grinned. The love of my life stood in the wings shaking her head. Sarah looked as if she were encouraging Eilís to walk on stage. But she was having no part of it. I turned back to the audience. She's a little shy. Maybe if everyone's real quiet, she'll think you've all gone home. A hush fell over the crowd. But I knew it wouldn't last long. Come on, love. It's not so bad. They won't bite. I cooed into the microphone. Much. Ian, bless him, left his drum kit and strode to the women. Together with Sarah and my in-laws. He managed to get Eilís to walk out onto the stage. She gave me a look that promised retribution and slid her arm around my waist. Everyone. This is the wee lass that dragged my waterlogged arse out of the North Sea. Not only is she strong and beautiful, she's the smartest person I know. Even if she did agree to marry me, I pulled her closer to my side and kissed her temple. Eilís, this is everyone. She waved and buried her face in my shoulder. The audience erupted in applause. Ian placed a stool beside me and whispered something to her. Eilís went wide-eyed but sat. I turned to her and smiled. I wrote this one that cold night when my throat was on fire, and you nursed me back to health. She smiled and dipped her chin. My nerves threatened to overtake me. Hands shaking. I played the first few notes and leaned into the microphone. Way back when, we danced in fields of heather. Maypole ribbons in the air. You wore yellow flowers in your hair. I still remember the tune we hummed. You held me that night drunk on dandelion wine and whispered softly that you were mine. I still remember the promises we made. A flute joined my acoustic guitar to create an otherworldly feel to the ballad. The truths of ancient whispers in the night's thick wind. I forgive your parting, my darling. But this love has no end. I still feel the sting of your tears on my face. I leaned close and ran my thumb over her cheek. Ian added the hollow beats of a bodhran and increased the tempo. The stage lights came up and the crowd cheered. I belted out the chorus. Lifetimes have passed us like horses on a carousel. You surprised me each time we met. Each time I fell. I remember your smile. Every time as sweet as the last. A certainty mixed with denial. Impossible circumstances. Each time a trial. Eilís fixed her gaze on me and swayed with the music. I remember you called it stubborn. Well, I called it determination. I winked, which earned me a grin. Never forget I love you. We'll be here again. I know the rhythm of your heart song, beating a melody with my own. Hauntingly familiar. A childhood lullaby calling me home. Lifetimes of searching, of loving, of parting. It's our time again. Ian stopped playing and the lights dimmed. I sang the last verse accompanied only by the wafting melody of the flute. Don't despair when winter comes. Spring will give chase to the cold sorrows. We'll spend the summer dreaming of tomorrows, and the autumn growing content. I remember the way, my love. We'll be here again. We'll be here again. Eilís watched as if lost in a trance. I had to touch her. I set the guitar aside and drew her into my arms. My voice quivering, I sang the chorus, but this time I sang it to her. Never forget I love you. We'll be here again.
This has been part 2 of Dragonstruck. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated with AI. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find more of her paranormal and contemporary romance novels.